Well, good morning. My name is McKade Stewart. I get to serve here as the Director of Student Ministries, and it is so good to be in worship with all of you this morning. As you've already heard, it is a special Sunday in the life of our church as we celebrate our graduates, both in high school and also those who have graduated from college and postgraduate work. Just grateful to be able to celebrate so many amazing young people this morning. And this hasn't just been a special Sunday, but it's been a special year in the life of our graduates in their schools, but also in our church and in our student ministry, starting all the way back in August. We took a group that was combined with this year's graduating class and last year's graduating class on a whitewater rafting trip as an opportunity to pass the torch from one class to the other. It's continued throughout this year with special opportunities on Wednesday nights at youth group and on retreats and mission trips. And many of you have participated in this milestone year by serving as prayer partners, writing anonymous notes and letters of encouragement and sending gifts and care packages and praying steadfastly for our graduates as they've made these major life decisions to enter the workforce or head off to school or even move to another country. And so we can often look at today as an end to this special year of celebration as we look at all the things that our graduates have accomplished. And today, I think, actually really serves more of a twofold purpose. Yes, it's a celebration of the culmination of all that they have achieved and accomplished throughout their time in high school, but also today is a celebration and a commencement for what lies ahead. And so this is a season of excitement and expectation, but it's also a season for many of our graduates filled with lots of change and uncertainty. Some of the major life changes for our graduates might include going to a new school or starting a new job. Some of them might be leaving home and having to make their own meals, set their own schedule, say goodbye to old friendships and say hello to new ones. But perhaps the biggest change of them all, for some of our graduates, they're going to have to learn to do their own laundry. Now, I don't know about you and your experience graduating from high school, but for me, laundry was a big deal because I had the blessing of growing up in a home with a grandmother who had the spiritual gift of doing laundry. And so I never had to fool with any of the different settings or the temperatures or the different buttons that are designed to confuse you on a washing machine until I graduated from high school and found myself living on my own. And just so that you're kind of aware of the young adult's relationship with laundry, I did some research for this morning because I thought you'd like to know. And so, for instance, did you know that according to a recent poll of over 2,000 millennials and Gen Zers, only 68% of our younger generations feel confident in how to do their laundry? And I say only because that leaves 32% of us who experience stress and anxiety every time we need clean clothes because we're afraid we're going to do it wrong. I mean, no wonder why they call us the anxious generation. According to the same poll, only 42% of those surveyed credited their parents or older relatives for teaching them how to do laundry. That left 19% to learn from looking at social media tips and tutorials, which I think proves that social media can be used for good, depending on which tips and tutorials they looked at. And 23% had to learn by experimenting on their own, whatever that means. The question that I would like to ask is how many experimental loads it takes before you're finally able to crack the code of walking away without a pink sock. And although most of you in this room have figured out how to do your laundry and aren't faced with some of these graduate-specific concerns, the reality is that all of us experience change and uncertainty throughout our lives. It might be something as small as an adjustment to a routine or to a responsibility at work or at home, but it might be something as big as a career change or a move, the loss of a loved one or a new addition to the family. It seems like this year in particular has been filled and will be filled with lots of change and uncertainty, whether that's technological disruptions, the fact that it's an election year, or the geopolitical conflict that our world faces. But it's not just this year, because our world has changed dynamically since the onset of a global pandemic just a few years ago. It's challenged us to adapt to a new normal, to try new things, and maybe nobody knows that better than our graduating class. 4 years ago, they began their high school careers fully online, having church small groups socially distanced out at the Lawrenceville campground, and each year since then has looked just a little bit different than the year before, both at school and at church. And this experience of change is actually really nothing new. In fact, many of us would argue that change and uncertainty are really constants throughout life and have been for some time. As Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher, said over 2,500 years ago, the only constant in life is change. Or more recently, rock band Rush's Tom Sawyer knows changes aren't permanent, but change is. Seems like the only thing that hasn't changed in 2,500 years is that we now understand that change and uncertainty are inevitable. And so in the midst of an ever-changing world, we need an unchanging anchor. And Jesus offers that to each of us. Just before he goes to the cross to accomplish the greatest change in the history of the universe, the reconciliation of God and humankind, he sits at a table with his closest friends and he says this to them and to us. In John 15, beginning in verse 9, he says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I've said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." So our text today begins with this reminder of Jesus' love for those who would come after him, this love that he's about to demonstrate in a unique and powerful way. But then he follows that up with a command. Jesus calls us to abide, or some translations might say remain in that love. This word that we translate abide is this Greek word meno, which literally means to stay in one place. Usually in this context, it means, or is used in reference to one's home, the space in which you might dwell. And so Jesus effectively here is calling us to make ourselves at home with him. I love the way that Pastor Samir Masad describes what it means to abide with Jesus. He says the characteristics of abiding in Jesus are a submission to, a resting in, and a focusing on. A submission to, meaning that we have to submit our will to God's will, submitting to God's way over our own way, submitting to Jesus' authority over our lives. He says it's a resting on. To rest on something involves putting your full weight into that thing. So we're invited to rest on the promises of Jesus, to rest in the person and in the character and in the work of Jesus. He says that abiding in is a focusing on. And to focus on Jesus means to spend time getting to know him by reading about his life and his work and the way of life that he's invited each of us into. And that means creating space for Jesus to speak into our lives and into our hearts. Now, if that definition doesn't quite hit home for you, maybe this one will, from the famous theologian, the Big Lebowski. It says, "The dude abides." One of the greatest quotes in movie history. Now, if you're not familiar, throughout the movie, the dude lives this radically carefree lifestyle, unfazed by the chaos and the changes of the world around him. And while my hope and prayer for our graduates, I'm sure their families' hopes and prayers would be that they would have a little bit more drive and ambition than the dude, I think that the lesson from his story is that we don't have to be swayed by chaos and change that may be happening in the world around us. For me, this concept of abiding really began to take shape and make more sense for me when my wife and I bought our first home together about 2 years ago. I had spent the past 5 years living in 6 different places throughout my time in college and my first year after. And so while I got really good at packing up and being able to move and never really unpacking and surviving off of 2 bowls, 2 plates, a spork, a spoon, and a spork, that's really what it bore down to. So hopefully our graduates learned that lesson pretty quickly. But through those constant changes in my living situation, I never had a chance to be settled, really even to unpack what I owned or be comfortable. And so when my wife and I got married and we bought our first home together, it was perspective shifting that we had a place where we didn't have to worry about having to pack up and move out in a year, but a place where we could unpack and be comfortable. A place that we could return to after a long day of work or a long trip and rest and recharge. A place where we could lay down roots and remain regardless of whatever else life threw our way. Now, I don't want you to just hear from me about what it means to abide, but also from the people who've been praying for our graduates throughout this past year, and also from the leaders who have led their small groups for the last several years on what it means to them to abide, as well as what they hope for our graduates going forward. So take a listen.
To me, abiding in the Father's love means having a strong faith in the good times and especially in the challenging times.
First of all, to know that you are loved by Him with no restrictions whatsoever.
Abiding in God's love is being with God, being in God's presence.
For us to abide in His love is to love one another as Jesus commanded.
Sometimes we can look at things big picture and think about a whole lot of complication, but what God says, He says, I want you to stay with me. I want you to stick by me. I want you to walk closely beside me.
Me, abiding means just walking alongside God.
When I think of abiding in the Father's love, I guess I think more along the lines of staying focused and in tune with God, trying to make sure that you are connecting with Him on a daily basis.
So I would say, take time out in your day, reading a scripture or doing a devotion.
To be more of an active participant in abiding.
Stay in the Word, stay in the Scriptures.
We pray that God's love will shine through each of you and that your love will impact them in a powerful, amazing way.
And understand that their obligation is to love God and love others better than they do themselves.
That God is there walking right along beside you every step of the way.
So my hope for the class of 2024, as you go out into your bright, beautiful futures, is that you abide in the Father's love with peace in your heart and a strong faith.
And it's our hope that the class of 2024 will intentionally walk with God as He wants you to walk with Him.
Absolutely. Best wishes to the class of 2024.
Congrats.
And so that's what it means to abide, to walk with Jesus no matter where life takes you. Although everything around you may be constantly changing, God's love for you isn't. But Jesus isn't done. He continues on in our text, giving us another commandment and detailing what happens when we abide. Verse 12, he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends." And then in verse 16, he says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and to bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask Him in my name. I'm giving you these commands so that you may love one another." So that's the call, to go and to bear fruit. And according to Jesus, we do that by abiding and loving others the way that He has loved each of us. When I think about what that looks like, I think back to the beginning of this milestone year for our graduates, when as a church, we talked about living with a you-first mentality. We define living with a you-first mentality as following Jesus, being invested in our community, living as real people who have real relationships, people who serve others, and we do that with thanksgiving. And when we live with a you-first mentality as opposed to a me-first mentality, we begin to bear fruit. And not just fruit that we see in our own lives, but fruit that we see in the lives of those around us. At the beginning of our time together this morning, you got to hear from some of our graduates about what their church means to them and the ways that their church has impacted their faith journey. You all, as the church, have shared the Father's love with this graduating class throughout their time here by putting them first. And you've produced fruit. You've produced fruit by serving in the nursery, by changing diapers, by teaching Bible stories. You've produced fruit by serving as children's ministry coaches, as Sunday school teachers, and as VBX volunteers. You've produced fruit by serving as student ministry small group leaders, as retreat chaperones, and as senior prayer partners. You've produced fruit by serving alongside them at Lawrenceville Assistance Project, Summer Lunch Program, at Candy at the Cabins and the Easter Festival, and at Lawrenceville Lights. You have shown this graduating class what it looks like to abide in God's love and what it means to be the church. And in doing so, you've created a home for them. a place for them to abide, a place for them to be comfortable in who they are, a place for them to remain or to return to. Now, for that fruit to last, you have to continue to show up in their lives even after they've graduated. You have to continue to invest in them by writing them notes of encouragement and sending them care packages, by going out of your way to welcome them, whether they remain here as a part of this congregation or whether they return to their home church during breaks, by inviting them to be a part of small groups and Sunday school classes, to propel or to cook hot dogs at community events. And for the graduates, you've heard from your prayer partners and your small group leaders about what it looks like to abide and to bear fruit. First and foremost, it means staying connected to the vine. It means finding connection and community that may look different from what you're used to here at home, whether that's a church or a small group or a campus ministry. It involves living a you-first lifestyle, whether you're going to college or entering the workforce or living in another country. And let's just be honest, it takes work. It takes work to abide and to produce fruit. A few months after Caitlin, my wife, and I bought our first home, we decided it would be a good idea to plant a garden in our backyard. And so we went out to the store and we got a few plants, some peppers, some tomatoes, some squash, some lettuce, and we began to prepare the area. We cleared out the grass, we laid down the soil, we put up a fence around the area, and we started to plant what we got. We took the time to space everything out properly to make sure the roots had enough room to grow. We made sure everything was going to get enough sunlight. After a few months, we realized just how much work it took to maintain a garden. And not just keep everything alive, but to keep it all productive. We realized pretty quickly that everything needed to be watered daily, that it needed to have the right amount of water, that we needed to weed the area, that we needed to make sure that no birds or squirrels or a lettuce-loving puppy who loves to dig and very quickly learned how to jump a fence. And so by the end of the season, we were left with only one fruit-bearing tomato plant. In other words, gardening wasn't just something that we could prepare for really well and then set up and leave and expect it to produce all on its own, because our garden needed time and care and attention. And the same is true for our spiritual lives and our relationships with others. To abide in Jesus' love and to love others as Christ does requires us to invest time and care and attention into our relationship with Jesus and our relationships with one another. And so no matter where you end up, for our graduates and for our church, no matter what changes or uncertainty you may face, if you want to abide in God's love and bear fruit that will last, it's going to require you to invest in and nurture your relationship with Christ and other people. For our graduates, you too have been prepared well by your families and by this church. But our hope and prayer for you as you graduate and take this next step is that you wouldn't just leave these things as they are, but that you would invest this time and attention and care so that you might abide in God's love and bear fruit wherever you go.